morning is from the Holy Bible. It's found on page 860, 861 in your Pew Bible. And it is the Gospel reading of Luke 24, 13 through 31. The walk to Emmaus. Now on that same day, two of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, and talking with each other about all these things that had happened. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus came near and went with them. But their eyes were kept from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are you discussing with each other while you walk along?" They stood still, looking sad. Then one of them, whose name was Cleopas, answered him, "Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place there in these days?" He asked them, "What things?" They replied, "The things about Jesus of Nazareth, who was a prophet, mighty in deed, and word before God and all the people, and how our chief priests and leaders handed him over to be condemned to death and crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one to redeem himself and Israel. Yes, and besides all this, it is now the 3rd day since these things took place. Moreover, some women of our group astounded us. They were in the tomb early this morning, and when they did not find his body there, they came back and told us that they had indeed seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but they did not see him." Then he said to them, "Oh, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have declared. Was it not necessary that the Messiah should suffer these things and then enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he interrupted them, the things about himself in all the scriptures. As they came near the village to which they were going, he walked ahead as if he was going on. But they urged him strongly, saying, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening, and the day is now almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight.
Let us pray. Holy One, we have heard again a familiar story of those 2 disciples on the road to Emmaus. Let us find ourselves this morning walking beside you as we walk these days of our lives, each and every day, here in our place in our time. Amen. Now, one of the things, before I start, I want to say in our call to worship, it says something about praising God and clapping hands, things like that. I had an intern, a seminary intern once, who liked to remind people that even though we're UCC people, even though we're congregational, it's okay. Clap your hands. It's okay to say amen.
Amen.
But not like that. And I, for one, I'm comfortable. One of these times I'm going to try it. Not this morning. One of these days I'm going to have a sermon walk. I got the guy in the camera who's trying to follow. I'm going to do just that. We're going to have a conversation. And you know what? It's okay for you to talk. It's going to ask questions. That's why we're here. Remember last week, what did I say about the door?
Check your brains.
We don't check your brains at the door. Bring your thoughts, your questions in here. And one of these days, we're going to have a sermon where it's going to be very interactive. And it's okay to stop and say, wait a minute, I don't know what I think of that. Or I've never understood that. And I'll probably say, well, neither do I. But we'll try to figure it out together. But for today, I want us to go back to that story. Think of it as a story. And as we're entered into that story, we find ourselves, it might be like it's an early afternoon. The heat of the day is starting to build. As Cleopas and companion, their heads are hanging low. They're scuffing along in the dust of the road that leads to Emmaus. In my imagination, I see them and they're just passing a signpost that reads Emmaus 10 kilometers. I also imagine that the other disciple very well could have been Cleopas' wife. And why not? Women played an important and crucial role in the life and ministry of Jesus and his disciples. Now, for that time, that was a bit of a stretch for many of the religious leaders, but Jesus was a bit of a radical when it came to social standards. Let's make no mistake about this and assume otherwise. Jesus was sent to the cross because he said things that riled up the religious authorities. And let's listen in to an imaginary conversation that they were having along the way. Cleopas begins by saying, what was he thinking? I know, the other person says, if only he hadn't talked so much about a kingdom of God and how we needed to receive it at any cost. Yes, that was what put the Pharisees over the edge, that he might be a king, even a god. Why couldn't he have left well enough alone? Now look at where things are. He has left us in one big mess. What do you think, Cleopas? Should we put any stock in these rumors about angels in the tomb being empty? Cleopas kind of rubs his chin and says, sounds pretty far-fetched to me. Can you imagine such a conversation? I can. It was about this time, perhaps, that Luke tells us that this stranger approached them, and they stopped and stood there in the roadway looking sad. Why were they sad? Well, the simple answer is they were confused, they were grieving, they misunderstood everything that had happened, they were angry, and a host of whole other emotions bouncing around inside of them. Why they were sad, that's easy to answer. Perhaps it isn't the right question necessarily to focus on this morning. How might be the better question. How do they move on from here? How do we move on from here? And quite possibly was one of the questions they were asking themselves. Their master, their teacher had died. No, more than that, he'd been executed. They had hoped that he was going to lead them into this new world of grace, of peace, of freedom from oppression and tyranny, and a time when true justice might prevail. But no, he had to get himself crucified. And now, having been associated with him in any way, they were also labeled as radicals or troublemakers. How could this have happened? How were they going to move on from here? And now this stranger shows up with this question. Hadn't he heard? Was he the only one in the whole city oblivious to the events of the past week? And as this stranger joins them, Cleopas and his companion continue on their way. But what else could they do? And I think it was in their continuing on that I find the key to the future of their movement, our movement, the Christian church. In spite of the confusion, the misunderstandings, the grief, and the loss, in their continuing on, Cleopas and companion, they did several things. One is they welcomed the stranger. They welcomed him as they were walking along the way, and then later in the evening they welcomed him to stay. They invited him to join them as they traveled along, difficult as this time was for them, as lost and confused as they might have felt. They make room for him in their lives as they make their way to Emmaus. So one, they welcomed him. Two, they shared with him their story, and then they listened to the stranger. They tell him what they knew of the events that had just taken place in Jerusalem. They tell him about their hopes and their dreams surrounding the Nazarene carpenter. And then, as he speaks of what he knew, they listen with a sincere interest in what he has to tell them. And thirdly, as they listen, they also learn from this stranger. He has something to teach them, something they need to hear. They're open to this, and they're able to learn as they listen. We're told that it was in the beginning with Moses and all the prophets. He interpreted to them the things about himself in all the scriptures. And then fourthly, and perhaps most importantly, they invite the stranger at the end of the day, the end of their journey, to dine with them in their home, where he breaks bread. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, because it is almost evening and the day is now nearly over." Powerful allusion here to communion in this passage, especially in light of the way the meal is described and how it was shared. While they did not recognize who it was who spoke to them, this does not stop them, though, from offering hospitality. Remember, up to this point, he's just a stranger that joins them along the way. They do not know what awaits them at the end of the road or at the end of that day. Still, they invited the stranger to join them in their journey. It is my contention that as much as what Jesus said changed them, to help them see what they did, the actions they took, the attitudes they carried, helped move them from where they had been to where he could take them. Yes, it was Jesus who came as stranger, yet if they had not been receptive, if they had not welcomed him, if they had refused hospitality to a stranger, would they have even have had the opportunity to recognize him? If they had not allowed him to join them, say nothing about sharing a meal with them in their home, they would never have had the chance, as brief as it was, to recognize Jesus in their midst. Now, we are living in the midst of a wonderful and challenging time for the church. We are living not only with the fallout caused by COVID, and what that means to us now, and the loss of attendance and things like that in most of our churches. I'm just saying now that the attendance in church is 60% of what it was prior to COVID. We're also dealing with something bigger than that. We're living in a post-Christendom time. Not just our congregation, but the Christian church as a whole is struggling with what it means to be a vital, relevant faith community in the 21st century. No, I looked it up, and a poll was done. And within Christians, people who claim they are Christians, pastors rank 8th out of trust out of professionals. Their own past 8th. 40%. Only 40% of Christians say they feel their pastor is trustworthy, fully trustworthy. And this is Christians. The common populace out there is half of that, 20%. There's a whole list of others that are considered more reliable, more trustworthy than pastors are. Now, to be honest, pastors, we've brought that on ourselves. The media likes to find a pastor who's done something wrong, just like a lot of professions, and they like, they like to pound on that. But we've done that ourselves. I mean, in most cases, what they find happened. Some immoral activity or some unethical activity, and so we have brought it on our own, we have to change that. But we're living in a time where the church is not the center of the community anymore, is it? I mean, I can remember, I'm old enough, but not that old, to remember back when this building hosted just about every meeting that took place in town. That's not happening here anymore. It happens at the school, it happens at the fire station, it happens other places. So what do? This is the world we live in. This is the world that we live in. So what does it mean to be a vital, relevant faith community in such a world? As Bob Dylan sang in the 60s, these times they are changing. Yes. We're not the church, nor can we be the church of the 1960s or 70s or 80s or even 90s. I remember once our son Nathaniel, I was experimenting with trying to introduce new music to the church. So I had what was called a praise song that we were going to sing. And Nathaniel was one of the guitarists that was going to play, and he had a friend of his who was another guitarist, and someone was going to sing, and he said, well, I want to do this song. He said, oh, Dad, that song's so 1980s. And this was in like the year 2002. And really, the reality is things are changing that rapidly. The technology and music styles and everything, what was, 5 years now is over. When you buy your computer and it's outdated, it's time you press on. Button. The question is, how do we move on from here? How do we move on in this new world we find ourselves in? We just may feel some of the same emotions that those Emmaus Road disciples felt. Confusion and concern about what lies ahead. Knowing that life must be different in the future. Yet not knowing what that future looks like can be fearful. We long for the security of the known past. Yet, think about it. Think about that known past. When you were going through it, did you really know what was going on? Did you really know what you were doing? And was it that secure? We struggle to let go of unfulfilled hopes and dreams. You ask Donna, I have lots of things I look back on life and said, why didn't I stay with that or make this decision at that point? We do that as a church. We want our church to continue. We look back and say, oh, we've done this, maybe we've done that, or we long for the days when, the Sunday school had 20 kids and VBS had 50 kids. That's not going to happen for us. We just have to realize that. The culture, society has changed. That doesn't mean the church doesn't have a role. We do. More important than ever. More important than ever. So how do we move ahead when we do not know what lies out there? Well, I think it begins very simply. We take our cues from the two disciples on that Emmaus Road. Number one, welcome the stranger. Welcome the stranger. Invite them to join us on our journey. Learn about their journey. Invite them to join us even though we can't say exactly where this journey's taking us. Many people come to church. Some of them are looking for answers. Many of them are just looking for someone to walk alongside them. Non-judgmentally, just be my companion. We need to open up our lives to the strangers in our midst and listening to what they might have to teach us. Inviting them to come into the center of our life as a community of faith. So who is the stranger in our midst? Well, to be sure, it's the person you will meet for the first time this week, a true stranger. The neighbor who just moved into the community. Or the family that moved in some time ago and you've not taken the initiative to introduce yourself and welcome them. But it might also be the person on the other side of the sanctuary from you. The fellow who shows up on occasion but slips out with anyone speaking to him. You know, it's easy to think, oh, someone else will do that. But in a church this size, folks, church the size of ours, every one of you is a member of the hospitality committee. Remember that. Don't think, oh, Sue Club will do it. Sue's standing over there by me. You know? Yeah, I'm going to start naming names. Tell I'm getting more comfortable here. But you all are part of the hospitality ministry of this church. How well do we really know our own folks? Their concerns, fears, pains, struggles, both past and present, family situations, their joys. What is it that brings them satisfaction and a sense of belonging? Most of us are here because we don't want to be part of a big church where we wouldn't know most people. Reality of it is most of us are here because there aren't many choices. But you could drive a little way and be part of a larger congregation. But even here, how well do we really know one another? How can we care for each other if we don't really know each other? How can we pray for each other when we aren't really that acquainted with each other? All this talk of welcoming, sharing, listening, and learning, inviting, communing together can begin right here with the persons around you. Share, and listen, and learn from each other. The coffee hour fellowship times we have after worship are wonderful opportunities for this. Extend yourself a bit. Invite that person who just kind of pops in and out the coffee room. They may not want to come, and that's fine. But invite them. And go there yourself. Perhaps you sit with someone you don't know as well, get to know them a little bit better. But all of it can't stop there. It must reach beyond the walls of this church, beyond the membership rolls of this congregation. This is how we will continue to move ahead. Who knows? Who knows who we will meet on the road or who might come knocking on our door. I'd like to close with, as a way of closing, with a Gaelic rune of hospitality that you have heard I've used before. You've heard it before. It was given to me by Bishop Caddy. I saw a stranger yestereen, put food in the eating place, drink in the drinking place, music in the listening place. In the sacred name of the Triune, he blessed myself and my house, my cattle and my dear ones. And the lark sang her song. Often, often, often goes Christ in the stranger's guise. Often, often, often goes Christ in the stranger's guise. Look around you, friends. Let us begin to take notice of the strangers in our midst.